Hi, everybody. This is Mike Oppenheim, and you are listening to Coffin Talk, Interviews with the Living, a weekly podcast that explores how our views on death affect the way we live our life. This week, coming to me from the local area here in Phoenix, Arizona, is a very good friend, Vin Jensen. He and I are in a writing group together, and the first year I knew him, I thought his name was Ien Nivens, spelled I-E-N, because he has a split personality who publishes under that name. He's an incredible writer. I am jealous and admiring of his skills at the same time. And he has available works out there. You can find the American Book of Changes, a reimagining of the ancient divination system known as the I Ching, and a novel called Tangible Angels. He's currently working on a trilogy of Mesopotamian stories called the Books of Shinar, dealing with the destruction of the Tower of Babel and the legendary confusion of human language, and a series of fantasy novels about a portraitist and his subjects, beginning with the man who raised him in Letters to Geera. That's the work I'm the most familiar with. But Vin is an incredible person with like a really sensitive mind that sees the world and understands the world and knows how to translate it back to us. And I'm always impressed by what he notices. And that includes just conversation, not just his fiction. So I cannot wait to pick his brain about the metaphysical world. Vin, how are you doing?
I'm doing great after that introduction. Never better.
Awesome. I try to pump guests up, but I also know you, and I'm delighted to have you on the show. So let's start with the basic three, which is how old are you, where did you grow up, and what generation, if any, do you consider yourself a member of?
I grew up in a little, a medium-sized town called Enid in Oklahoma. Some people might be familiar with it from crossword puzzles because it's a great four-letter word.
I was about to say that.
Yeah. I grew up there until I was about 19, and then I spent some time in college and moving around, and ended up in Massachusetts for most of my adult life. I'm now, I'm going to turn 67 in a few weeks. So that's where I am. And I forget the third question, but
do you think you're a part of a generation?
I've always sort of been told that I came in at the tail end of the baby boom.
Yeah, that's according to like data and all that. I asked the question more just to see if people are into that, not into it, and just kind of suss that out. And also, it's just kind of like a running theme on the show, so people can just like keep track of various answers. So the longer the show goes, the more likely I am to keep it in, not take it out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up with three older brothers, two of whom were practically adults by the time I came along. So
wow.
It was kind of a dual generational sibling situation.
That's interesting.
And I've always felt like I was kind of the tail end of a lot of things, born in the 60s, but didn't really start growing up till the around the 70s. So
that makes sense. And what was Oklahoma like back then? Do you ever go back, or was that really just until you were about 18?
No, I still have family there, and I love Oklahoma in its gentle kind of. The people are very, very, very conservative. And I don't fit into that mix anymore as I did when I was young. So it's always a little bit of a challenge for me going home. But, my family I love, and we're just family. We're not political entities. So, I think of people generally in Oklahoma as having very big hearts, sometimes with dark corners in them.
Wow.
But we all have those,
Yeah, for sure. That's well put. When did you get interested in writing? How old were you?
Oh, I think I wrote my first Western comic book when I was about 7.
Cool. That's awesome.
I've been trying to write ever since, sometimes successfully, most of the time not so much, but yeah, it's just one of the things that I've done all my life,
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, you're excellent at it, so I figured I would start to unthread that while I unravel other threads, such as when you left Oklahoma or wherever you went for college. I don't know if you stayed in state. What was like your stated goal to yourself at that point? Like, I'm going to go to school and learn this, or I'm going to do this.
Well, my first goal was probably just sort of to get out of town and, see some other parts of the country. But I was very self-conscious because growing up in Oklahoma, I sounded like an Okie. I was on the debate team, and we'd record ourselves doing speeches, and I'd hear myself, and I, like the rest of the country, thought that my accent sounded dumb.
Oh, wow.
So I really worked on that. I worked to not sound like an Okie. I'll probably break into Okie at some point. And so I went away to Southern Illinois University, where the locals boil water if they want to heat it up, And then there were other kids coming down from Chicago to go to college. So I discovered that I needn't have bothered. And it was an important lesson for me to know that we all sound some kind of way to each other, and none of it is real. It's all just, the old saying, I think, is a language is a dialect with an army and a navy.
Mm-hmm,
So.
That's cool. And what was it like growing up, like coming of age in the 60s and 70s? Because that's like a very volatile era. I know from like history, like assassinations of leaders, race riots, legislation, civil rights movement. I know you were young, but I'm just curious, like, did that affect you?
Well, sure. Here's the dark corners of those big-hearted people that I was talking about. Memories that I have of the Kennedy assassination came from people telling me that God never wanted a Catholic to be president anyway.
Wow.
So there was that. And I was so sheltered from the world at large. I grew up in a Pentecostal household, and the church was kind of everything to my growing up. And so I got this very sheltered view of the world as a vast evil place, and that I was better off kind of staying confined to the nest,
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of those issues, the social issues of the times, I was just sort of encouraged not to look like hippies, not to dress like hippies, not to do this or do that, But I maintained a kind of ignorance of the world that in some ways allowed me, it served me as a cushion against some of the more harmful influences. Mm-hmm. But then, of course, I was raised teetotaler, and the year I went off to college in Southern Illinois, all I did was drink because I didn't have any regulation or any control or any instruction.
Yeah, totally.
So it's a dangerous way to grow up in a lot of ways, but I will never disparage or regret the love that was experienced within that community.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. I mean, like, we're talking, this is going to come out much later, but like Israel and Hamas just went to war, and I'm not going to talk to you about the particulars of that, but just more the sad repetition of like nations going to war, and what you're talking about, the dark parts of of religion. But like every time I want to slam religion, because in my mind Palestine or Hamas rather, and Israel is a religious issue as well as other issues. I think of what you just said, and like you can't deprive that from people, that like genuine love and all that.
Oh yeah.
Do you practice any form of religion now? Do you have any, do you align with any group?
I don't think I align with any group. If I had to give myself a sort of religious designation, it would be something like Taoism. Mm-hmm. And I say that so hesitantly because, one of the great tenets of Taoism is that the Tao that can be called the Tao is not the Tao, or the way that can be called the way is not the way.
Yeah,
right?
Totally.
So I love the ambiguities in that particular philosophy, and it doesn't require me to believe in a particular kind of made up deity, that with all the trappings that come with that kind of religious power.
And so I guess this is the perfect time to ask you the, main question of the podcast, which is, what is your philosophy? What do you think happens to you, like specifically you, when you die? Your consciousness, you.
Hey everyone, if you're a fan of the show, please head over to mikeyop.com and click the subscribe button. It's the best way to support us, and it's free. That's MIKEYOPP.com. Thanks.
Okay, so I actually wrote a poem recently and titled it Coffin Talk.
Awesome.
I'm so excited. And I think I wrote it for this occasion, so I'm going to just read it to you if I may.
Absolutely. I love it.
I'm haunted by the ways we've died before, clawing for breath down a crumbled gorge, the slow concretion of his tender organs, an acid bath, a stumble down a stair, choking on the smoke of her own incineration. Spare me yet another incarnation. May the westward wheel progress across my bones and grind them indistinguishable from those of previous tenants here. Let me disintegrate. Tell your own good stories in your own good time. The grinding wheel is just and fair and kind and correct. The wheel does not discriminate.
Wow.
So that's at least my current thinking, is that, I've had experiences in my life. I've had some mystical experiences, and I think I want to talk about it because I tend not to.
Cool.
And I think most of us tend not to talk about things that we can't wrap our heads around or explain. One of the experiences that I had was toward the end of my first marriage, when things were falling apart. And my then wife was in the living room chanting some kind of Native American prayer. And I don't know what she was chanting exactly. And I was in my room meditating at the time. And I sort of went somewhere and I felt somebody chanting behind me, a man's voice chanting and laying his hands on my shoulders, on the back of my shoulders, with where I'd been having, holding a lot of tension.
Wow.
And I was always in pain. And he held his hands there, and that whole area just heated up very intensely. And the next thing I knew, I was transported to a place where I was in bed with my then husband. His name was Keegan. Now, I don't actually remember whether I was a gay male at the time or a female.
Okay.
But what was significant about the experience was that I had this view of a ridge, a hillside outside, and the woman who was my now ex-wife, my then wife in real life, was walking along, and I understood, I realized through the conversation that we were sisters-in-law, I think is the way I want to put it. But we were in-laws. And that had to do with this hunk of a guy called Keegan. And he looked at me and he said, "Don't ever put a watch on me, because if you do, I will," and he snapped his fingers, and I was wide awake. I was completely removed from this vision, or call it past life regression, whatever. I don't have names for it. I have theories, but I don't, and I'm resistant to say, "Oh, I believe in reincarnation," because I had this experience.
Yeah, interesting.
Because the experience doesn't prove anything about the nature of the world. It just informs me about my own mind, right?
Yeah.
So one theory is obviously, this is a past life. I was that person then, and I'm this person now. Another theory is that we all have access to this global human consciousness,
Ah.
and that we can experience each other's lives in limited ways and in extreme moments of extremis, right? And I think that theory ties into what some people call the Akashic record or whatever. I don't buy into all of that stuff because at the end of the day, it's all imagined. It's all made up. Whether it's true or not, it's still imagined.
Yeah.
So I try not to put too much emphasis on that. But that happened, and I had a subsequent, that one was spontaneous. I had a subsequent sort of induced, and I'll use the label past life regression, where I was, when I was young, I played around with hang gliders. My friends and I bought one.
Mm-hmm.
And we used to go out in this place called the Glass Mountains in Oklahoma, and we'd jump off cliffs and stuff. And in this second experience, I was my name was Jumper, and I died trying to cash in. It was like sometime in the 1920s, and definitely in the United States, because I was competing with the Wright brothers to try to, or with whoever else was out there trying to come up with the first flying machine, right? And I died in that. That's the memory, was that I died, and that I was this, as a dead person, I was an enormous burden on the woman that I was dating at that time, who was just said she was always sad when she was around me. Not great relationship material, but it helped me to explain current situations. It's sort of a lens, so I don't know if it's just a sort of self-therapy that I got to engage in, or if it's something deeper than that. And at the end of the day, it's all very, very mysterious to me.
Mm-hmm.
So what do I think happens when I die?
I love this, but I'm just in trance. Keep going.
Yeah, it takes you everywhere, doesn't it? I know that my body is going to disintegrate, and I'm already witnessing my mental acuity starting to get fuzzy around the edges. And, you see people with various kinds of dementia, and they do seem to be engaging in a process of identity disintegration of some kind. So, I think probably that this person that I call Vin Jensen is going to disintegrate, evaporate, go away, whatever. There are various forms of immortality that we can sort of comfort ourselves with, and one is being carried on, our identity being carried on in the form of other people, because we all, I believe that we all create each other, right?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I am both a product of my own creation, but with such heavy influences and hands, lots of chefs in the kitchen in making a personality. And that's what I love about fiction too, is that I think what we do all day long as people, and fiction writers just kind of get another glimpse of it, is we're creating souls. We create the souls of the people we know, and we store them in our own minds. So we populate our heads with vast numbers of people, some, really in detail and others more vaguely. But all the time we're creating and populating the worlds inside our head. And we call it knowing people, right?
Yeah.
So in a sense, when I die, all of those people that are with me die too, because there are no more synapses. There's no more electrical activity keeping all of that stuff alive. Fortunately, you're younger than me. You're probably going to go on and have your own life, but you won't have that life inside my head anymore. No loss to you. The loss is all mine, right?
Yeah.
But Yeah, I don't see a mechanism. And I guess at the end of the day, I'm kind of I do believe in physical processes as kind of generating everything, including the abstract. So do I expect to live on with the same kind of awareness that I have now? No, I don't. If there is a repository for souls that are separate from minds, and I don't even know what that means, because the only self that I know is that created self that I can think of as my personality. If there are deeper levels to that, then maybe I've accessed them in those weird otherworldly experiences,
Yeah, yeah.
But I can't know. I can't know. At the end of the day, it's mystery.
And so, like, what do you? This conversation is so awesome to me because I have these thoughts to myself a lot. I don't have your experiences, but I have these thoughts, like, not the exact same ones, but the same thing about, like, what if other people are watching what I'm watching, but they know they're watching and they know they're not controlling, and I'm just like this idiot who is watching but thinks he's controlling.
Yeah.
I think that a lot, and then when I do something like, just jump into like a cliche of myself, like I'll start arguing with someone when I like know there's no point in arguing, and then I have to remind myself like this is just fake and you're just doing this, like this is an old habit, stop, and then I'll stop.
Yeah.
But the situation where I can't do that, and this is what I want to ask you about, is pain. Like I've tried when like I've cut my thumb before and it's like pulsing with pain to like repeat my meditation mantra or just like pretend it doesn't exist and ignore it, but it doesn't really work. I'm curious, have you ever had any similar thoughts about that? Do you have any like thing you could relate with this conversation about how you don't really know what's going on, but then there's pain, which is like feels so real?
Right. Yeah. I like to think of myself as a relatively compassionate person,
Mm-hmm.
but I had a kidney stone a few years ago. My wife and I were just talking about this yesterday, and they're excruciating. People make comparisons with childbirth, and I don't know. All I know is a kidney stone, you don't have to change its diaper and you don't have to send it to college. But this thing was excruciating, and I was being held up in the emergency room where I was being seen because there was somebody dying in a bed down the hall, right?
Oh, wow.
They were COVID. And I had zero compassion.
Wow.
My pain was so demanding that I didn't care
Yeah.
about your life and your death. I'm in pain now, right here, me. So yeah, pain is it's a useful thing, but boy, it can when it grabs your attention, there's no getting around it.
Yeah, that reminds me, we had to do this like drill in San Francisco with the Red Cross came in. I worked at the 14th story of a 15-story building, and they said, in the event of like another big earthquake, here's what's likely to happen. And the scariest part of the whole thing was they said, by the way, if the water supply is messed up within 48 to 72 hours, the average person with that water goes insane, and they just start murdering. And they said that was the biggest threat in any emergency. Like picture anything, like Hurricane Katrina, any of these events is yeah. And it was just, I remember just thinking like, I don't want to live in a city. I want to live like so far away. And then I was like, but if you live so far away, there's the opposite side of that. Speaking of which, since you grew up in like semi-rural Oklahoma, which is considered a rural state anyway, and then you've lived in like major Phoenix is the 6th biggest city in the country right now, I think. What do you prefer? City living, country living? I know you've moved around a lot.
Oh yeah. I love to be within striking distance of a large city,
Cool.
An international city. I like to be within striking distance of the culture that you just don't get out in the sticks. You just there aren't enough people and there aren't enough venues to provide it. So I definitely like living outside of a city. I'm not a fan of traffic. I do kind of like San Francisco and Boston. I love the public transportation.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't fallen in love with it here yet because I just haven't had the opportunity or the necessity, I suppose, to use it as much. But yeah, I love cities, but I need to get away.
Yeah, I don't know you that well, but because you like go away and then come back and move a lot, that's something we have in total common, and I haven't been able to do that in years now because I had kids, which was intentional, so I'm not bitter or regretful, but I knew that would be the one, part that was going to be hardest for me is the anchor effect.
Yeah.
So I totally agree with your answer, though. I think striking distance of a city is a brilliant way to explain it. I do want to circle back, actually, because I had a note to ask you this, and then we went off on the imagination pain tangent. When you talked about like feeling your mental acuity like change, I've actually tried to ask my mom about this like multiple times, and she's just said it's hard to explain, which is like genuine, but since you're an author and you're so good at writing, I'm curious because I'm in my 40s, and so I'm just noticing like retrieval isn't as fast and like things like that. But is it like scary or is it like wonderful and interesting? Like, what is the experience like?
Well, more frustrating, I think, than scary.
Okay.
I think if I were showing signs of actual dementia, that would be scarier.
Mm-hmm.
But I think probably scarier for my loved ones than for myself.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah.
Because my ability to deal will be diminished if that happens, and other people are going to have to do that dealing for me and with me and about me, and that's saddening. Yeah, I hope that doesn't happen.
No, yeah, and I asked you, I felt comfortable asking because you're not actually slow or anything to me, and the way you described it, you were just talking about like, the way I would say like, I can't run as fast as I used to. I can't do a million things I used to. I bend over more slowly. I've injured myself doing routine things in my teens and 20s, so I just figure the body starts to go first for me and now the mind. And I'm always curious of the experience ahead of me. And sort of along the same lines, what is, in your wonderful poem, the part that stood out the most to me was like, the wheel of, I believe you said justice. Is that what you said?
The grinding wheel is just and fair and kind and correct.
That's the part I wanted to ask you about. So when you see what you feel is injustice in the world, in your personal life, in any situation, in your calmer, more reflective points, are you just like, okay, well, like, this is just that? Or is that like a thing that always rules over you and helps you through life? Like how, because I've said like a similar thing to people before and they've just said like, well, that's Pat.
Yeah, it is. And I'm being a little bit tongue in cheek when I say that.
Yeah.
There is no greater injustice than death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, totally.
So how can I say that it's just? It's never just.
Yeah.
It's always a personal affront.
Uh-huh.
Unless you personally find your way towards some kind of peace with it. And I can't say that I have, but that's my goal, is to find peace with the inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
And, I get Dylan Thomas in his rage against the dying of the light,
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that's really how I want to go. Mm-hmm. I much prefer peace.
Yeah.
And I don't have any more rights than anybody else. So, we're all going to go and I'm in it with you. So that's that, that's kind of Pat.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It just is, it kind of is the way things are until and unless we can find some kind of scientific way to remove it. And I'm not sure that I want to see that day.
Yeah, me too. I'm definitely on that train. I want to ask you one last question because I think you're wise and I think you're considerate. And at the beginning of the interview, when I was talking about you in front of you, what I was really trying to convey to my audience, because you should buy one of his books, and I've only really read your fiction, but you see the world with this like sensitive lens that is so accurate. And I love it. It's like a movie that just like catches the sun glimpse the way that you like wish your own eye would sometimes, but does sometimes. And you do it so well. So how do you see the next, like, 15, 20 years here on Earth? Like, just, do you think culture and progress and mankind is moving in a direction of any sort?
In circles, yeah, that's a direction. I think there are some things that are always going to be with us. And unfortunately, I don't see a way around war until and unless we all have a common enemy of some kind, be that something alien or, we finally kind of come to terms with the fact that death is the great injustice.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe we can all work together to end that. But then we have population to deal with, and we have all kinds of other problems. So, and I'm excited about a lot of things. I'm excited and terrified by the advent of what we're now calling artificial intelligence and machine learning. I think that's going to complicate the way we see ourselves and the way we see the world, and it's all going to be interesting. But the great mysteries we will have with us forever.
That's a wonderful way to explain it, and I'm so glad I asked you that question. And again, for everyone at home, it'll be in the notes how to find him and his works, but you really should consider buying one of his books. There's a brilliancy that will just soak into you, and it's on a language level. Like, the language itself does something to me, and I'm really serious. So, Vin Jensen, again, thank you so much for coming on the show. To everyone at home, again, the best way to support the show is to go to MikeyOpp.com. That's MIKEYOPP.com, and sign up for the newsletter on that service. And once again, my name is Mike Oppenheim. You have been listening to Coffin Talk, and we will see you soon. That you see me and I see you hear this tune.